best word to describe motherhood, or a series of words, is full on. The idea of having to do my job at the same time as looking after a newborn baby kind of bursts every kind of brain cell I've got. I'm just doing your toes. Right. Hi, my name's Claire Newell and I'm the investigations editor at the Telegraph. This is my first ever podcast. Welcome to the Juggling Act. I really wanted to have a baby. I'm in my late 30s and I saw people around me at work and I thought, well, they've got children. They seem to be managing to work and have careers. If they can do it, I can do it. So we had our baby at the beginning of the year in January. It was a really amazing experience despite all the sleep deprivation. Being a journalist, things happen at the last minute. You get a phone call, someone wants you to go up to Scotland to speak to them about some secret project. And because you're always chasing the story, you normally go. And so I've worried quite a lot. Would it be possible to do both things? Could I be such a committed journalist and look after my son? I guess the truth is there aren't that many women in senior, high-profile roles in the UK. And I'm thinking, why is that? I've decided to make this podcast because I'm about to go back to work and I'm not sure how it's all going to pan out. I want to learn from other women who have already done it to see what they can teach me and get some advice. So today I'm meeting Emma Pinchbeck. She's the Chief Executive of Energy UK. She is one of very few women CEOs in Britain at the moment. She interviewed for the job as Chief Exec when her baby was only a few weeks old. And honestly, I just don't know how she did it. Emma, how on earth did you manage to go to an interview and talk sense when your baby had only just been born? I couldn't leave the house.
Yeah, in hindsight, I genuinely have no idea. I think there was a logistical problem, which is that so my baby had really bad silent reflux and just wanted to feed all the time, like all of the time. And so the logistical problem of getting from the outskirts of London into central London and then to an interview for an hour and then back out and home around the number of feeds I was doing because I breastfeed was fun. So there was a kind of exercise in
logistics
achieving that. Yeah, by the time I walked into the interview, I remember thinking, if the interview is a total car crash, I'm still really proud of my day.
Yeah, fair enough. I think I was still wearing my pyjamas then. So what did you actually wear to the interview?
I had one dress with me that when they phoned me for the interview, it was literally the only thing I had that was kind of suitable. So I had to, in order to get there, I think I breastfed her, shoved her in a sling because she couldn't be put flat in the pram because of her reflux, because she would scream. So I shoved her in the sling, ran for the tube in like the tracksuit, got her to this cafe over the way from where the interview was, and my husband took 2 hours out of work and came to meet me
in the cafe
and took her off me whilst I changed in the loo of a cafe into this dress that was really tight on my like post-baby body, though, you know, thankfully floaty at the bottom. But also I couldn't breastfeed in, run to the interview, do the interview, like, oh yeah, everything is fine.
Look how professional I am.
And look how professional I am. String some words together, run back out because I'd hit the time that she needed to feed again, take all of my clothes off in a loo, and I was still 3 weeks postpartum, so I was still bleeding quite heavily.
Yeah.
So in the kind of like really big pants and the really
they're horrible, those pants.
Yeah, again, sharing so much about myself with the world. And like, so like naked apart from that, and like my skirt around my waist in a toilet in a cafe in central London. Breastfeeding. Just, yeah. And then came out sort of semi-zipped up, gave her to my husband, went back in, put the tracksuit back on, took her home. And we did that 3 times for each of the interviews.
Oh my God.
Yeah. It was completely bonkers. It was literally getting on the tube in all of it that I'm still the most proud of.
So what would a normal day look like? So before having a baby, a typical
Before
day.
I was 9,000 years old.
Yes.
Have normally a kind of team meeting in the morning. I would use lunch break to do errands or shop for supper, because I'd never really think about dinner until the middle of the day. And then I'd work late. It's not a 9 to 5 job. I'd take it home with me. On a really nice day, if I wasn't training in the evening, I'd go and meet my husband and maybe spontaneously have dinner out somewhere in town. This is also pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Pre-pandemic, pre-baby life.
And with the stakeholder meetings, can you just explain that a bit? So would that be, say, meeting someone in Parliament to lobby them for something you're trying to achieve, or...?
In my previous job at Renewable UK, we'd be meeting industry leaders, our own members in their head offices in London, parliamentarians, policymakers in government and in Whitehall, and then the kind of big network of people who think about energy, from journalists through to campaigners and NGOs to think tanks.
So it sounds like a very busy kind of career that you've had.
Yes, yeah, very, and I really love it. And when I describe it to people, I think it's very, well, people-led, and a lot of going out and about.
It sounds like you were kind of darting all over the place with your jobs before having a baby. When you got pregnant, or maybe when planning to get pregnant, did you worry about how you might be able to do your career whilst looking after a baby?
I was really worried for most of my career about what having a baby would do to my career. And actually it was factored into why I said yes to the chief exec's job eventually, because I wish I didn't feel this way, and hopefully people like me being in the job means that others won't feel this way. But I was sceptical about whether I would be offered a chief executive's job once I visibly had a baby. I think
so it might damage your career opportunities.
I really did.
I think you've only just returned to work full time, is that right?
Yeah, I'm a month in.
And how's it going?
Oh, it's a complete car crash, but everyone's dealing with it. It's you know, it is what it is. I think it would be very unhelpful to pretend otherwise. I also don't think I'm unique in this, and I am somewhat experiencing what most parents went through in sort of April as care and responsibilities met working from home. So, you know, poor old me. But it's a complete car crash. My daughter is incredibly strong-willed, and that's mostly very endearing, apart from when you're trying to do things like settle her in at a nursery. So processes that take people, 3 days, take us about 3.5 weeks.
And what's been going on? Has she just been crying when you would leave?
Oh yeah, kicks off, won't nap. I picked her up last week, and it had taken 4 nursery staff to attempt to get her to sleep, and apparently she got put in a quiet room all by herself because she was waking up all the other babies by chatting and laughing at the idea that she should, possibly take an afternoon nap. Yeah, she's a tiny maniac, and I love her, but she's not making it easy. Yeah, and she's been like that throughout. Right, she's quite. I'm really struggling not to use words like demanding and high maintenance about a girl, which I should take myself outside and hit myself for. She knows what she wants, and she's got a really strong character, which I love, but it means that she needs a lot from us, and I enjoy that. But sometimes around work, it would be quite nice to have a placid, sleepy baby that just, you can just put down.
Yes.
Maybe, I don't think any of them are like that, though, actually. I mean, she's my first, how would I know?
So how are you finding juggling a busy job with motherhood so far?
I've become a massive attachment parent. I'm basically the worst of things. I'm like an absolute sucker that wants to spend every single moment with my baby, and an absolute sucker for work, and I want to spend all my time in the office.
So what are the hours then every day?
I have to do about 35, 40 hours across 4 days. So they're 10-hour days.
And do you fear that you won't see her enough?
Yeah. The massive blessing of not having to commute right now is I see her.
Get to see her more.
Yeah, I want to cry when I think about it, but when I go back to commuting, I basically won't see her Monday to Thursday in order to have a day with her on Friday. I'll get up before, well, as she does. She probably won't be having a morning feed by then, so I'll just get up and go to work and won't come home until she's gone to bed, and I have no idea how I'm going to manage that. And that's part of the negotiations on how really will I go back to doing my job the way I did it before? Can I? And what effect does that have on how I perceive myself to be doing? Yeah,
I worry about just the same things.
Yeah, it's just constant guilt. Like,
basically.
Yeah.
So today is my first formal day back at work from maternity leave, and leaving him this morning is hard when I step out the door.
Yeah, it's a really difficult thing. But I recognise how much happier I am to be back in work, and I earn more money than my husband. If biology were nothing to do with it, I'm not sure I would be the one to have carried the child and had her. Do you know? Like if it were just about temperament and how important work is to the two of us. For me it's central to who I am, but there is no question she's shifted about how I think about it and how much I think about her. So yeah, the emotional heft of giving her up for me to do my job just feels so hard. But I think partly because they're so dependent on you, like stopping trying to wean her has also, funnily enough, been a bit of a process. And there was a point where I just literally couldn't imagine that she would be separate from me in that way. And I felt really guilty about the fact I was trying to wean her so we could get her into nursery so I could go back to work. And I had a bit of a moment in the March, and as you give up feeds, I think something hormonal happens as well, where the breastfeeding part of your brain is like, and so as I was giving up night feeds, I just went crackers for a few weeks, and my husband was like, maybe you don't have to go back to work, we'd be fine. But he's like, but you spent the first 3 months of this whole experience being like, this is a complete joke, I just want to be back in the office. So yeah, I don't think you can ever win, long story short. And I think it will be good for her in the long run that I'm happy and I'm someone who loves to work. So that's just the way it is. Also, on a feminist point, my husband has no such guilt.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? Have you and your husband had the same response to her crying? Because when it comes to me and my husband, I was just thinking about it. I find it very difficult to tolerate crying for very long. It almost is pulling at my heartstrings. Whereas I think he is pretty much able...
Yeah, he's like, she's fine.
Yes. And I wonder if that's true for everybody.
Yeah, I think there is definitely this thing that happens because of the breastfeeding originally, where the crying would just kind of do things to my body, like physically. But I think every mum I know... I think every primary carer, so I think it's probably the person who's been off, who's responsible for them, who had that kind of connection you have where the baby is your job and everything about your life. Everything she does I read into, and when she cries it breaks me, no question, and he's much more able to distance himself.
And how have you found... am I right that you started back at work doing 1 day a week, 2 days a week?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
It came about because when they offered me the job, she was poorly. I was finding it difficult to work out what to do, and they basically gave me huge amounts of flexibility. And I'm very lucky. I was due to go back in July originally. My new organisation then said I could come back on a flexible pattern of my own determining. So I said, well, I'll do, 1, then 2, then 3, then 4 days, and that will work around nursery settling. Of course, then the pandemic happened and the nurseries didn't open as planned. So actually what we've done is I did 1 day a week with hours wherever I could until we could get a nursery place.
That sounds like a lot of juggling.
It's actually been it would have been easier not to go back at all, I think, in some ways, and just start from scratch in September.
And it sounds like it might be a bit different now with COVID, but it sounds like with your job, there's a lot of kind of racing about and talking to this person, talking to that person and getting things done. One, did you feel worried before coming back to work about whether you'd be able to do that with a baby? And 2, how have you actually found doing it?
The thing I'm still worried about is evening events, though because of the pandemic there are far fewer of those. I would rather have gone back to work in normal circumstances. I would rather everyone wasn't going through what we're going through in the economy. And I know I speak from a position of relative luxury as well, in that things like my husband and I can both work from home, and at the moment we're both employed and we can afford childcare and all of that kind of stuff. But coming back to work as a new mum when everyone has been visibly juggling children and work, where you can get the CEOs of major energy companies talking about their families while they're doing commercial updates, where dogs, babies, children have turned up on Zoom for months before I started, actually makes it a much less vulnerable position for me.
Yes, maybe it normalises it a little bit.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you found that there's quite a shift? So before having a baby, maybe being quite last minute and reactive. Oh, let's go out for dinner this evening. I'll go to that meeting. It's going to start half an hour later.
Yeah.
To the change of having a baby when there's quite a lot of routine and planned life.
Yeah, it's really boring. No, it's not. She's so... she's a whole new world, all of her own, and a kind of new adventure for us both. But my husband and I are both quite sociable people. We're very busy, and we were used to being quite spontaneous, and neither of us were sort of notorious in the family for being terrible at planning. So that's been a real change for us both. And we aren't very routine based. My social life was always very last minute, and I think we really miss it. And I think our relationship was predicated on a lot of that stuff. And
on the spontaneity of fun.
Yeah, and being out and seeing people. And again, hard to say how much the pandemic has affected our perception of parenting in that regard. But I would really like to get back to a point where we can go out a little bit and do some last minute things. And I think every parent listening to this is like, ha ha ha, you're never doing that again. But yeah, it has fundamentally changed the way we live. And you will know this, but we're in that current stage of babyhood where everything is, she has such a strong routine that the times that we get to be spontaneous in inverted commas are like the 3 hours between naps at the weekend. You have to get out, go somewhere and get back and put her back down again. So
I found that quite difficult, actually, that everything is so governed by the baby's naps.
Yeah.
So if someone said, do you want to meet up for lunch? My response is normally, I can't do lunch, but I can do breakfast or brunch. Yeah. Because I need to be home by kind of 12:30 so he can go to bed. And that's kind of fine, but I feel like a real pain in the arse. Yeah. And I also feel like I've become a regimented person, which is difficult. And what do you think the effect on your relationship has been with all this juggling?
The nice things, I always knew he would be, but my husband is like an absolutely fantastic natural kind of father, and he loves her and does as much as is physically possible to do when you are the partner of a breastfeeding woman. Generally speaking, at the moment, I'm doing all right at holding the job down and the childcare down, and so is my husband. But there are two things suffering our life. One is time alone. Yeah. Never ever get time alone, and I think that's probably been exacerbated by the pandemic. I have nothing to compare it to. She's my first baby, so I don't know what a non-lockdown baby feels like, but we just have no time to ourselves, particularly to exercise, which is something that I've always done to keep me on a kind of even keel and give me space, and the same for him. We don't get that time with each other, and he certainly doesn't get the best of me, and that is something that I think is shifting again now she's a year old and she's sleeping better and we're getting longer evenings and we feel a bit more punchy about staying up past 9:30 because we know that we might get some sleep, and if we don't get any sleep that night we might get some sleep the following night, whereas for 9 months of this journey it was just you bank as much sleep as possible, as much of the time as possible, and so we weren't having much time spare in the evenings. And
I think it's hard, isn't it, because it's almost because your life partner is an adult that it's almost easier to take them for granted, because you can explain to them, I'm really sorry, in my case I've got to do this story tonight, or the baby is teething, I'm really unhappy, and so their needs and your relationship needs, their kind of dual needs as part of that, go on a kind of back burner. But I guess there's a question about when do they get to go on the front, or when and I thought it would be sooner than it is, and again maybe that's the pandemic, it's not like we can go out for dinner easily, so I think some of my choices have been really selfish and less about him than about her and about me. That's true. The other thing I'd say is you just have no idea about who you're going to be as parents before it happens. And he really has been the more patient one of the two of us. And he really did adjust quicker to being a parent than I did, I think. I had an awful start to motherhood. I think I would borderline escape postnatal depression. And I was living in a rental flat in North London away from the community of mums I'd met in my antenatal classes, and very luckily my husband had a friend in that area who just had their second baby, and through her I met a lot of the local mums, and one of them was a Glaswegian GP,
on her second baby, and I think she must have just clocked that I was having a hard time, and I went to the pub, which was massive adventure for me at the time, and she's just so relaxed, and she said, by the way, if you don't want to like throw your kid out of the window or throw yourself out of the window at least once a day for the first sort of 10 weeks of the baby's life, either you're not normal or the baby isn't normal. And I was like, I think I love you. And then she went on to be like, I didn't even love my son for the first like 4 months of his life. She's like, I wanted to care for him. I felt this huge sense of duty, but that kind of amazing kind of motherhood experience, she's like, it didn't happen for me until he was 4 months old and he looked up at me from a changing mat, and I was like, oh wow. And she's like, it will happen for you. You don't have to feel that way immediately. No one tells you that. No. And that is exactly what happened to me. Like, she's everything. But if you'd asked me in week 2, I'd have said, is it going to be worth it? And of course it is. Because the cult of motherhood is that you don't feel that way. And some of the things I found really difficult about becoming a mum were because of my expectations about how you were supposed to feel being a mum, and about my expectations about how childcare would go from the beginning, and about the expectations that other people had for me because I was the mother versus what he expected and had grown up with and seen as a man, and about what fatherhood would be like. And I think talking to a lot of my mum friends, that meant we were constantly furious. So we were like, you know, you felt guilty, but also were furious with your partner, whilst also being incredibly grateful for your partner. So there's this great point, I think about 6 months old, where we were all really tired. When the babies are 6 months old, we were all really tired. And you were just constantly like pathetically grateful that this person was staying with you, despite the fact you were being a complete lunatic most of the time. And then feeling really resentful that you felt grateful, so you were then a complete lunatic, so then you felt grateful again. You know, it's
weird about the anger.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know why I'm so angry a lot of the time.
Yeah, that's a new one for me too.
I'm actually not sure that my husband could ever do enough.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I don't know what my problem is.
I was exactly the same. I mean, I have some concept of what my problem is rationally, which is that like we both had a kid, but I put on 12 kilos, gave up the sport that I love, have like veins in parts of my body I didn't know I had veins, birthed an 8'2" lunatic out of my body who screamed at me non-stop from the second that she was born, then fed her with my body so that I've got calcium deficiency, then gave up my career for like a period of time, adjusted to all the cultural expectations that went with that, massively struggled with my identity, and then like I'm also supposed to be cheerful, glowing, competent, and the same person I was before, and a perfect mother. Yeah. Whereas my husband just got a baby. I mean, and that's a real simplification because it wasn't like that for him, but in my brain, that's like what it felt like. It's been easy for him. You can't know when it's your first just how amazing it is when how amazing they become and how much it becomes part of your life, and the idea of not having her around and how much she means to me and the idea of losing her, it has all been completely worth it. And I would hope that maybe a second baby I would A, anticipate the utter car crash of the first few weeks, and B, be able to rationalise it. But it was just so, I had no idea how I was meant to feel, and I think all of that needs to change. Every choice you make as a parent comes with a whole load of emotional heft for you, social judgment that you didn't ask for, and then some kind of like logistical life consequence that you then have to work your way around. And I think that's just the way it is until she's 25. Yeah.
Basically,
yeah.
And I think when we spoke on the phone, you told me that she was such a good breastfeeder that you could breastfeed her during meetings. And I'm pretty jealous of that because my baby gets so distracted by everything. In doing that, presumably on Zoom meetings or phone calls, did it make you feel vulnerable?
Yeah, I don't think I ever did I put the camera on ever whilst I was doing it? I don't think so. Hang on.
Decided not to flash to colleagues.
Yeah, I think I always tried to do the kind of breast extraction with the camera off at least, so that no one actually saw my boobs. I thought that might be crossing the line as a chief exec. Like, when is that actually just some kind of horrendous offence versus a lovely nurturing gesture? Where I have found it difficult is sometimes that in important meetings when you want to really just have everything together and not be distracted and present the career version of yourself to the world, because she's breastfed, because she knows what she wants, and we work from home in a relatively small house. She sometimes had to be breastfed in meetings with really important stakeholders. I mean, like central, like number 10 or really senior people in the departments I work with. It was a distraction for me. It kind of threw me off my game a bit. You know, I didn't have a choice about separating the mother part of me and the chief executive part of me in those moments. They had to kind of uncomfortably coexist, and that I found difficult. I sometimes feel very vulnerable about that. I recognise the power in it. I think it's a really important thing for me to not be embarrassed about it. I've tried to not show any embarrassment about it because I think that's so valuable, but sometimes I wished it wasn't me, you know.
Did you ever feel or have any reservations about being upfront about your baby?
Yeah, it's a constant driving it, but I think I've been a woman in a relatively male-dominated industry in a senior job for a long time, so this doesn't feel different from the regular amount of imposter syndrome and the kind of questioning how to present yourself, which comes with that territory anyway. It just feels like the natural extension of it. You know, I went through it when I was a relatively young woman appointed to a senior job, and then I went through it again when I was a pregnant youngish woman in a senior job, and now it's the same question about being a kind of, you know, a mum in a senior job. And I think my organisation recruited me to do things differently. They recruited me when I had a 3-week-old baby. They knew what they were doing.
Yes, they knew what they were getting.
Yeah, exactly. They've made all the allowances for me to be able to do my work this way. They're happy with my job performance, and I think that there probably is power in having someone who's willing to breastfeed on camera. Well, off camera.
But audibly.
Audibly, or have a small baby on their lap during meetings trying to climb inside their shirt. That has happened more than once. Don't know how she managed it. That's valuable. I recognise the value in it. And so the vulnerability is mine, and her privacy and how we manage that is mine. But I do recognise that I think it's important to not hide it and perpetrate the stereotypes of who you have to be and what you have to look like in order to be a leader.
And the superwoman, right?
Yeah, and also that I don't want to knock anyone's philosophy of female leadership, but I never had any patience with lean in. I don't want to lean in. I want to have exactly the same opportunities as like the bloke next to me who'd never have to lean in to think that they were good enough to be a chief exec, you know? I want to be imperfect, and I want to have a life outside of my job and still be able to do an extraordinary job. And I think the narrative of female exceptionalism for leadership is unhelpful. So I wear my failures as publicly as my successes, and my baby as publicly as a suit jacket at the moment. So, you know, that's fine. And on the breastfeeding front, I have been very lucky to breastfeed. It wasn't easy at the beginning. I'm really proud of it. I enjoy it. That will last her a lot longer than whatever I'm doing right now. And so it's important for it to be a priority. And also it's my legal right, so I don't really care.
Yeah, good for you. Isn't it funny with breastfeeding that often at the beginning, it's really painful and quite hard work and quite hard to get into, and you're hating it. And then a couple of months in, and by the time the baby's 6 months or a year, you're just loving it and you don't want to give up.
I'm supposed to be giving it up round about now. So actually, I remember saying I'd give it up at 6 months.
Me too.
Before having the baby. And then it got 6 months and I was like, "Meh."
And also the NHS says ideally do it for a year.
Yeah.
So you're like, oh.
Hey, the WHO says 2 years.
I know.
Saying. My husband keeps looking at me like, please no. But no. I am slightly over... It's very, very busy at work at the moment, and it would be nice not to have to remember to express. For example, I haven't done it today. This is genuinely true, and I tweeted about it. I forgot to express before my first board meeting.
It must have been painful.
No, it was worse. It was one of those occasions where I really didn't want to be visibly breastfeeding or expressing on a camera. I really wanted to nail my first board meeting and wanted them to trust me and to look, to be in full control, yeah. Realised I hadn't expressed, realised she needed the milk for nursery the next day, had to speed express. So like
I don't even know what that is.
Well, it's just like the most panicked, like find the expressing machine, sterilise it, because I still kind of go, oh, maybe I should sterilise it, get it on, and try and get 3 ounces off before I had to speak. So like with my microphone muted, with the camera angled up, just like everything is fine from the neck up. But down below, just trying to get it.
There's
3
1
ounces
ounce,
off.
2 ounces.
yeah. Before the chairman stopped speaking and introduced me, it was so, not ideal. So like, I'm looking forward to that part of my life being over. But the same as you, now I'm in it. I love that time with her, and she's only bitten me twice.
Did you, when you were, for example, scheduling meetings, have to think, oh, okay, I can't do 2 o'clock. Can you do 3 because you knew you'd be breastfeeding?
Yeah. My new PA is just amazing. She's been doing the job for 3 CEOs now, so she absolutely knows the organisation inside out. She basically runs the joint. Don't tell anyone. And then when I came in, she's also a working mum. She's got lots of busy commitments outside, and she's been really sympathetic to that for me. So we originally blocked out the times that the baby needed feeding in my diary, and that was just that. The problem was then my diary works about 3-4 weeks ahead at the minute, and the baby changed her pattern halfway through. So there was a point where she was feeding at the start of literally every meeting because she'd moved her windows by half an hour, and those were the meetings where she was climbing inside my shirt on camera. But yeah, that's exactly what we do. And now we try and block out some time, just 15 minutes, for me to express enough milk for the baby for nursery, though she can now go on to cow's milk. Hooray!
Yes.
So she just needs to feed either side of the day. Yeah.
And given that you're the chief executive, do you think it's easier for you to say, I need that meeting to be slightly later, without giving a reason, than it would be, say, for a junior employee?
No, I think it's more than that. I think as the chief exec, I say I need the meeting slightly later because I'm breastfeeding, and it is incumbent on me to do that because there'll be someone in my organisation that someday wants to have children or couldn't make those choices or didn't feel they could make those choices, who my doing that opens the doors for them to do it.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's and I try and say that to the team. It's not about one rule for me and one rule for everyone else. However I behave is how I expect them to be able to behave too.
Yeah, it's just a new way of working.
Yeah, I am not able to work the same way I was before. That doesn't mean I'm not doing my job well, but it's different.
Yeah, that's a good point.
It's very different, and of course I feel vulnerable having to say, I'm sorry I can't do a call at that time. I'm sorry I don't work Fridays, or I'm trying not to. I'm sorry I can't do an evening event, which will come for me once we go back to commuting. Yeah, I do feel vulnerable, but the board just signed off my probation, so I can't be doing it that badly. And that's been a really nice, like,
good.
oh!
So I've just left Emma Pinchbeck's home. I found it a really inspirational story. Since having a baby, I've definitely felt quite underconfident when it comes to work. I've doubted my own abilities. I've wanted to stay at home, partly because of my baby, but I've also felt a bit like hibernating. And talking to Emma has actually been really inspirational. Even though she felt the same insecurities as me, the same uncertainties, the same conflict about leaving her baby, she nonetheless decided to interview for the role of chief executive. And she got the job. And she's doing the job, and she's doing it really well. She feels just as insecure as I do about leaving her baby. She feels just as conflicted, wanting to do great at work, but also wanting to be a great mum and to spend time with her child. But she's forging ahead, and it is hard. She's really upfront about how hard it's been settling her daughter into nursery, how conflicted she's felt about stopping breastfeeding, how difficult weaning her baby was so that she could go back to work. And these are all conflicts that I've started to feel too. I feel guilty leaving him at home, but I also really want to work. There was a part of me that wondered, before I met her, was she totally mad doing an interview to be a chief exec when her baby was only a couple of weeks old? But actually, she was just giving it a go. She was just trying her best and seeing what happened. And of course, it's worked out great because she got the job and now she's doing the role. She's doing really well. So I found it really lovely meeting her, and I'm really pleased to have heard her story. And I think it's quite energizing for me to hear that someone isn't letting their insecurities and their vulnerabilities hold them back. They're not hiding in the house thinking they can never work again because they've had a baby. Because what she's showing is that, of course, you can. You might have to breastfeed your baby during meetings. You might have to skip events, but nonetheless, you can do a good job and do well. Next week, I'm interviewing Baroness Ruby McGregor-Smith, one of Britain's most high-profile businesswomen. Ruby was a top executive in the early 2000s. I'm interested to find out how she found returning to work with young children and if she thinks anything has actually changed for women now. Subscribe to this feed to make sure you don't miss it. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please do consider supporting our journalism by taking out a Telegraph subscription. You can get your first 30 days for free at telegraph.co.uk/audio.